freshman biology major.
Hi, I'm Amanda College and I'm an exercise science major. Today my partner Marissa and I will be discussing whether it's ethical or unethical to perform scientific experiments on volunteer subjects. But first we have to look at the background information. So what is considered ethics? The definition of ethical comes from the American Public University System, which discusses the definition in their article. It says, the norms of conduct that distinguish between acceptable and unacceptable behavior. In other words, it's something moral or not. The major type of research done on volunteers is biomedical research. What exactly is biomedical research? MB Cap states it in his article. He says biomedical research is conducted for collecting and analyzing data for which it can help advance the medical field. The experiments aid in improving healthcare and how we can treat patients.
So Amanda told you a little bit about the background information, but why are we talking about this subject? We're talking about this because volunteers sometimes risk their lives for scientific advancement. Yes, they do aid in biomedical research, like Amanda said, but sometimes they can also be harmed. So the safety and well-being of volunteers is an ongoing battle on whether it is ethical or unethical to have them in scientific research.
So it is ethical to perform scientific research on human volunteers. The main reasons are the Institutional Review Board, it could save a life, and volunteers are in control of the situation. First, we must look at that the Institutional Review Board is a main contributor to this. So what exactly is the Institutional Review Board, or the IRB? It is a board that regulates experiments to make sure that they are ethical. It shuts down the experiments to make sure participants are protected in every single way possible. So it protects participants by putting laws in place like the privacy rule. The privacy rule was created due to discrimination of researchers to volunteers. This law makes sure no genetic or personal information is shared with any other researchers throughout this process or in the future researching. In the past, let me highlight the word past for you. Volunteers/participants have been treated unfairly with the IRB board. But with this IRB board, it puts laws into place so it affects volunteers majorly. It helps protect them and make them feel safe, make sure they're not persuaded in any way to do anything they don't want to do. Next, we're going to look at who wouldn't want to save a life. So, medicine is very important in our well-being, as you know. And some of you may know someone with diseases or something that is hurting someone in some way that's uncurable or they don't know what to do about it. By this lack of information, it could cost someone their life. And let me really tell you, it could cost somebody their life, which is very serious. Without answering aloud, think to yourselves, how many people do you know that struggle with cancer or a disease that's uncurable? Cancer treatments, new prescriptions, and therapy tools are types of things that these experiments help with. An example is a clinical trial that is usually done, and that uses human subjects. An example of a clinical trial done is with Rachel Lehman. She did a trial from 2009 to 2015. She wanted to see how bendamustine affected breast cancer treatment. And let me tell you, it worked very well. There was no one harmed in it, and they found crazy answers and results with it. They're using the treatment now to help treat breast cancer, and it's going very well. And it's a great technique. Not one person was harmed, and the volunteers had to have breast cancer, so they were already infected with it. So when they volunteered, they knew that if something happened, that they had breast cancer. So, I mean, if it didn't work, it didn't work. They were already going to go. That's kind of was the mentality that the people were having in it. But wouldn't you want to be that person that helped prevent that? In all, these people saved many lives. Yes, I do think it is very risky to have an unknown virus put into you, but if you think about it, a lot of people have the flu virus put into them every year. Some of you may have had the flu virus put into you every year. Do you know exactly what's in that flu virus? Do you know exactly what's being put into you? But yet it helps us. Some of us it helps and it benefits a lot of people and it has saved a lot of lives. And we must look at that factor of how many lives we're saving. Yes, you're going to win some battles and you're going to lose some battles, but you're winning overall more battles than you're losing. The medical field is always growing and there will always be a new disease to cure. With the testing, we're helping to prevent these diseases from spreading in the future. To answer this question in your head to me, wouldn't it be ethical to save someone's life? Lastly, we're going to discuss how volunteers are in control of every situation. Why might a person want to volunteer, you might be asking yourself, because it sounds pretty scary and risky. But someone might want to volunteer because they may want someone they know may be battling with a sickness or an illness that they really just want to find a cure for. And it may be really hard for them and they want to go help and contribute toward that. They also may volunteer because they have a passion for research, or they're just curious, or maybe they're a doctor in that field and they want to help find more results and they want to know more and they want to dig deeper and find more stuff. Lastly, most experiments pay subjects money. So if you needed money, a lot of people in college, the reason college students participate is because they need money for college. They want the money. So we have to put those aspects into mind. What exactly is a volunteer? So, taken from the Merriam-Webster dictionary, a volunteer is a person who freely offers to take part in an enterprise or under a task. In other words, they can leave if they want. They're not forced to stay at all. It's not a job. They're volunteering. They're coming and giving their time because they want to help find the cure. Yes, if something does go wrong, yeah, they're going to be hurt. But they can leave. They don't have to stay. A lot of volunteers are made unaware. They don't want to know why they're allowed to leave. But Bosman, Slade, and Hirsch discussed in their article how the IRB makes sure participants are aware they can leave whenever. So there is a law out there and there's a board that makes sure these participants are knowing what is happening to them, what is going down, and they can leave whenever. They make sure they're not persuaded in any way. But when most people think of experiments going wrong, we usually think of the Nazis and in Germany and how they tested the Jewish people there and they froze the people and they caused horrible treatments on these people because they wanted to find research out. But let me remind you that this was not a volunteered experiment. They forced them to do this. And we're in this argument, we're talking about volunteers. So how is it unethical if they're volunteering? It's what they want to do. You're not making them do anything they don't want to do. But in conclusion, there are 3 laws set into place to protect the volunteer. There are many laws, and these laws are protecting them. They're keeping their rights to them. They're helping them feel safe. And also, wouldn't you want to save a life? How is saving a life not ethical? You want to help a person. It's a good moral to have. You are putting others before yourself. You could be the reason someone survives a serious disease. Wouldn't you want to be that reason? And lastly, the participants are volunteers. And we must remember that volunteers can leave when they want. It's not a job, it's a volunteer.
So Amanda just told you a little bit about why it's ethical, but I'm here to tell you why it's actually unethical to have volunteers participate in scientific research. First of all, researchers don't always follow the IRB rules. There are many researchers in many types of experiments, and some might throw a little bit of ethics out the window to get their research done. Also, volunteers are harmed in experiments. Volunteers have been harmed for years in the past and today, still in the present. Also, researchers can deceive their new volunteer subjects. Researchers are more intellectually advanced in the research they are conducting, so the volunteers might not know exactly what they're getting themselves into, even if they agree with it. So to go a little bit more in depth, researchers don't always follow the IRB rules. Researchers conduct unethical experiments for scientific advancement, says Angel when he wrote The Dangers of Human Subjects in 2015. So what does this mean? A good example of this is like if a researcher wants to study a specific disease. The easiest way to do that would be to infect people, but infecting someone is pretty unethical, especially if it's a dangerous disease. So a more ethical way might be to take a couple years to research it on animals, but it might take longer and it might not be as efficient as just infecting someone with a disease. So even though this is a bit of an extreme case, scientific advancement might be more important for researchers than a few lives of the volunteers. Also, the researchers don't always follow the IRB rules because they don't always accurately report their serious adverse events or their SAEs. Now, what are SAEs? They're anything that could cause long-term damage to the volunteer, such as birth defects, hospitalization, or even death. So if researchers don't accurately report these SAEs, this can deceive their new volunteers. If the new volunteers don't exactly know how many serious adverse events a researcher has, they might think, oh, well, I won't get hurt because this researcher usually doesn't have any serious adverse events in their research, and then that's deceiving the volunteer because they might actually get hurt. So from the BMC, Susan wrote in 2015, Inaccurate Reporting of SAE Statistics, and they looked at 300 clinical trials and found inaccurate reportings of some SAE statistics. The first statistic is 13% of researchers didn't mention SAEs at all. And if you're working with human subjects, why aren't you mentioning if you did or did not have any SAEs at all? It is kind of shady, and you don't want to put volunteers in a shady situation. 2% mentioned no SAEs, which isn't that uncommon because maybe some clinical trials just don't have any injuries. But the most important here is 34% incorrectly reported the number of SAEs. Now, why would researchers incorrectly report the number of SAEs? Either one, they don't know how to accurately report SAEs, which would be very dangerous because if they don't know how to do the paperwork, are we really sure they know how to take care of human volunteer subjects? Or they're purposely inaccurately reporting the number of SAEs because they don't want the volunteers to know that they actually have more serious adverse events than they really do, so more volunteers will come volunteer in their scientific research. So it's very unethical to have volunteers in scientific research because the researchers are in control and they still don't follow the IRB's rules. Second, volunteers have been harmed in experiments and continue to be harmed today. In the past, from the dangers of human subjects, Angel wrote about old experimentations that people might be familiar with. So for example, Nazi experimentation. In the past, Jewish people were frozen to death by the researchers, and they did this to see how long that the Nazis could survive in the freezing cold temperatures, which is extremely unethical. And also the Willowbrook State School experiment. And a little bit about this experiment is the Willowbrook State School was a school for the mentally challenged, and researchers went in and injected them with hepatitis. And they said, well, these people are either going to die because they're mentally challenged or they're going to die for the sake of research. And they picked for them to die for the sake of research. And although these were not technically volunteers, you can still see how researchers will take advantage of their subjects just for the greater good of scientific research. And this will still happen today. In the present, from Shamu and Resnick's primary article in 2006, they talked about some people that died in some present research. At the University of Pennsylvania, there has been a gene therapy treatment where an 18-year-old man unexpectedly died during that treatment. Also, at Johns Hopkins University, a 24-year-old woman died because she accidentally inhaled a toxic chemical during the research and just died. And lastly, at the University of Rochester Research Project, a 19-year-old woman died unexpectedly during their research project as well. Now, people are still dying today during research projects. This is unethical, and although these are just a few, you gotta figure there are a ton of research projects and a ton of clinical trials that people are still being harmed at and could potentially die at today. This is unethical. Imagine if you or someone you know, like your mom, just wanted to get money and walked into a research project, but they never walked out because they died. It is not the researcher's right to have any human life in their hands. And lastly, researchers can deceive their volunteer subjects. Researchers always have the upper hand, says Rosnica in her 2015 primary article. She calls it intelligent manipulation. And what intelligent manipulation is researchers always having the upper hand because they're more intellectually advanced on what they're doing. They know more about the process, and the volunteers don't really know what's going on. They don't really know what's being injected to them, even if they agree to it. A good example of this is the 1960s vitamin C study that was written in The Myth of Individualism by Calero in 2013. And what happened in this study is people volunteered and they thought they were getting injected with vitamin C. And the researchers were just gonna see what the effects of vitamin C were in these people. But in reality, these researchers injected them with adrenaline, which is completely different than vitamin C. And imagine if one of these researchers had a heart problem or one of these volunteers had a heart problem, and the adrenaline potentially harmed them or could have killed them. This is extremely unethical. Researchers can easily deceive the volunteers because the volunteers don't exactly know what's going into them, and it could cause injury or death. So this is why it's unethical, because if the researchers deceive the volunteer subjects, they could do many things wrong, and the volunteers should always feel safe and want to be able to leave. But how can they know when to leave if they don't really know what's going on? So to wrap things up, it is unethical to perform scientific research on volunteers. Like I said before, researchers care about knowledge all the time, and they might not always care about the volunteers. If they can advance scientifically and find a cure, who's to stop them from hurting a couple volunteers? Also, volunteers can unexpectedly die during experiments. Like I said before, you wouldn't want a family member going into a research experiment thinking they're going to come out and then never coming out because they died. Also, researchers can easily manipulate volunteers, and if the volunteers cannot feel safe and understand what's going on, then they shouldn't be put in that situation at all. So in conclusion, should volunteers be allowed to participate in scientific experiments? Just ask yourself this: is one human life worth more than another for the sake of science? The battle of volunteer ethics continues in the world today of biology and science, and it will continue until the scientific community comes to a conclusion that it is unethical to perform scientific experiments on volunteer subjects.